Hi everyone, Happy New Year. I hope you're all doing well and have a fruitful and healthy 2021. Allow me to thank you for all your support over the difficult year of 2020. And I'm looking forward to continue to produce quality content for you all to enjoy in this new year. Alright, let's move along. I'm happy to inform you that I have just released a new Baguazhang 10-minute primer on my Mushin martial culture YouTube channel. This continues to introduce and explain some fundamental Baguazhang practices and their key methods and details. This is the fourth in the series of Baguazhang primers that I have released, and I'm confident that they are beneficial to both new and existing practitioners of the art. So pop on over and have a look if you haven't already. Also, I'm continuing to release the series of that Baguazhang historic gathering which took place in Beijing in 1993, translating, subtitling, and adding background information for the performances there and Professor Kanga Wu's commentary. So there's probably another 3 episodes left and then all of that will be concluded. And you can also look out for a new episode of Kung Fu Explained, which will be the 3rd episode in the Shaolin Legacy series, which I aim to release this month as well. And this will continue in the timeline of the temple's history, taking us through the Tang Dynasty predominantly in this episode. And following episodes will continue through its historical timeline. So if you enjoyed the series so far, do keep a lookout for this new episode that should be released soon. Also, as some of you may already know, in December I launched the Huajin online learning program on the Mushin Martial Culture Patreon page. This program gives one the opportunity to learn the deeper aspects of Xing Yuen and Baguazhang in a systematic and complete manner, as I was taught by my Shifu Di Guoyong. My goal through this endeavor is to make available to you, wherever you may be, quality, instructional information presented in a clear, concise, and holistic manner, resulting in your skill development in these arts, which are profound and valuable. The course is available now for your enrollment through the Mushin Martial Culture Patreon site. On the site, you will find a 3rd tier named Huajin, which is the online learning program. Of course, I still have the other 2 tiers, which are for general support of both the podcast and the Mushin Martial Culture YouTube channel, where I publish various things related to the martial arts and their surrounding cultures. I am extremely grateful for any support which helps me to continue producing quality content. You may find my Patreon site at patreon.com/Mushin Martial Culture. That's Mushin Martial Culture, all one word. Alright, let's get into today's episode. My guest today is James Carse. James is currently based in England and has a lifetime of experience in the practice of martial arts. At the age of 12, he began his studies in Wing Chun and then went on to achieve a degree in sport and fitness. He then went on to study the Southeast Asian martial arts of Muay Thai and Silat, while at the same time he pursued an amateur boxing career. He first got involved in classical Chinese internal arts following university and decided to relocate to Hong Kong in 2005 to pursue his studies of Chinese martial arts. He remained there for the following 11 years and primarily studied Yi Quan under Chan Tak Chuen, who was a disciple of Han Xing Yuen. In 2010, he also began to study under Hui Kit Wah, who was a disciple of Han Xing Qiao, and further studied Yi Quan, as well as Liu He Bafa and the Yang-style Taijiquan with him. He has a deep and profound understanding of these arts gained under these exemplary teachers, and in 2016 he returned to England where he lives and teaches today. He has also recently released a book on the art of Yi Quan and his experiences studying them, which is available from Line of Intent Books. I'll put the links in the show notes. This conversation was truly enjoyable, and hearing about the Yi Quan culture in Hong Kong was fascinating. So here he is. I give you James Carse. Okay, welcome to the Drunken Boxing Podcast, Mr. Carse. You're all the way in England. I'm sitting in Beijing, and thanks to technology, we're able to have this conversation.
Definitely. Good morning or good afternoon. It's not very drunken for me. It's more caffeine fuel. But yeah, it's really good to join you. Thanks for talking to me.
Yeah, as you know, the podcast, I try to do them in person, and that's usually when the drunkenness comes out more naturally. So maybe in the future we can do that on a separate note.
That sounds fun.
Before we get into anything, maybe you could give us a bit of your background information and introduction.
Sure. Well, I mean, I've mostly been training martial arts for most of my life. I started when I was very young, around 8 years old, as kids normally do, and dabble in judo and taekwondo and things like that. Really had this passion to want to learn Chinese kung fu. Growing up in the northeast of England, there was not a huge range of teachers around at that time, which was kind of the mid-80s. Eventually found a Wing Chun teacher when I was around 12. And that really began my journey.
Okay.
I moved on good sort of 5-6 years into Wing Chun. Then I went on to university and studied sports science with the aim of starting a Wing Chun club at the university, which there was actually already one there.
Okay.
So that was an interesting time because that prompted me into a different direction.
All right.
So rather than training that, so I kind of put my kung fu on ice for a while, and I trained in Muay Thai and Silat and a few different arts. I funded my university by working on the door. So I was a bouncer for a few years, which was an interesting time as well. So it was a good learning point. And then following graduation, I moved down to London. And London's a bit of a hotbed for Chinese martial arts, a lot of teachers there. So I kind of opened up my research again and trained with quite a few people. And knew very quickly I wanted to go out to source. So I'm fast forwarding a bit here. But and that took me to Hong Kong full time. I moved out there at the beginning of 2005.
Wow. So you didn't know what you were looking for though when you went to Hong Kong, or was it still influenced by your experience in Wing Chun and that exposure that you decided to go there?
No, I mean, I'd stopped doing Wing Chun a long time before actually. I mean, I'd have friends who still train and teach Wing Chun and I'd kind of played around with them and we got together and stuff like that, but I hadn't formally learnt it. So no, you're right. So when I went to Hong Kong, I was still it wasn't with one particular teacher in mind that I went to learn from. It was to find out under the surface of what was going on there. And interesting with each one, I'd only had a very short introduction before I went to Hong Kong with a teacher in the UK who was a student of Mr. Yao. And I'd done a very brief training amount with him, but I was quite captivated by it actually. So that was top of my list to research, as was Bagua, Xingyi, Tai Chi. I was very much in a sort of internal martial arts phase at that time. So that was there was a general kind of collective that these are the stars I want to go out and have a look and see what's out there. And that's not what Hong Kong's known for as well, as you probably know. Most people go out there to learn Southern styles. They don't go out there to learn internal martial arts, but it's got a long history of internal arts. But it's a bit more, I'd say, hidden under the surface and more difficult to find.
Right. I mean, you even mentioned the person that gave you your first exposure in Yi Quan in England was a student of Yao. Was it Yao Zhongshun Senior, the father? Or
it was a senior, correct? No, not the father. No, it was the son. So obviously there's the twin brothers.
Okay.
And it was with one of them.
And I mean, as you know, that's Beijing. So I mean, Yi Quan is extremely what's tied to Beijing, as is Bagua. So
that's right.
Very interesting that you went to Hong Kong, even though that Yi Quan was something that piqued your interest. But I've heard from other people that they went into places like Hong Kong initially, or even Taiwan. It was precisely because it was just easier and more direct to get into, and maybe that was part of it too. I mean, you obviously went.
Yeah, it was also the work perspective as well.
Yeah.
So my full-time work is I work as a headhunter, as a corporate headhunter.
Okay.
And I was working in London in the financial markets, and so it was very easy for me to secure a fairly decent job in Hong Kong.
Right.
That made a massive difference because I could fund my training.
Yeah, it's all good and dandy to go somewhere to study and not have any means of income, because that'll cut your study period very short very quickly. And so I guess all of those things are taken into consideration. But coming back, I want to ask you a little bit about the situation in England, because you seem at that time earlier, before you went to Hong Kong, it was quite easy to find Wing Chun than most other styles. Is that accurate to say?
It was, particularly, I mean, you've got England really in many ways is two economies. You've got London, and then you've got the out of London, the regions. So I'm from the Scottish border, from the far northeast. I literally come from the border, and there's it's a lot more rural up here. There's far less martial arts going on. So I was really lucky to find a very good Wing Chun teacher when I was younger, and he'd learned from Alan Lam, who was one of the first Westerners who learned pre 70s, late 60s, from in Hong Kong himself.
That's very early.
So it was good stuff that I was learning. Yeah, very, very, very early. And you might remember he went on to he actually moved to LA. And we introduced one of those first video series. I don't know if you remember those Panther videos. Being inside Kung Fu and stuff. Yeah, he did all of that. So
I actually remember
did really well
his stuff now. Now I remember his stuff now that you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Wow, very interesting.
So, but then you got into London, and there was a lot more, and it started to kind of open up. And by the time I finished university and I was working in London, there was quite a lot of immigration from China as well.
Right.
So you had a lot of Chen style that started coming into the country. There's always been less Xingyi and Bagua, but hovering around bits and pieces of it. But there's been some, I would say, fairly big teachers in the UK. But you had to sort it out. And then of course there's always the rubbish as well of the stuff that was spawned in the 70s after the Bruce Lee craze, and kind of everyone took off their karate gis and suddenly put on kung fu suits and made stuff up. So it's still hanging around now to this day as well. I mean, a lot of stuff that was spawned there, big, massive associations and organizations. So I was always very aware that was, around, and sort of had to have your kind of, wits around you from a research perspective. And it's easy these days, isn't it, when you've got the internet and you can have a look and, well, when did this person learn from this person?
It's changed things a lot. I mean, the internet.
Yeah.
It's definitely changed things a lot. And it's actually interesting. You mentioned that after the Bruce Lee craze started, that people from other backgrounds, judo, karate, were just changing clothes and rebranding themselves out of and inventing stuff. And we still have it today, unfortunately, in Chinese martial arts, where people don't even have a background and they're inventing stuff. So the internet has been a real game changer in terms of, cutting people's bullshit out and giving you access to investigate further. But oddly, people still go, and there's still a lot of charlatans out there which are easily found.
They still do it,
and people still go to them.
They do.
Yeah.
They do, and they tend to have the best marketing around them. And we see that stuff shared every day on videos, don't we, on social media.
Totally.
And some of them have huge followings. And a lot of appeal to certain people, and I don't know, it's weird. Like some of it is that people just don't want to know. That kind of better you don't know sort of delusion around it, or don't really care, or they just haven't kind of sorted out to think, well, hold on, where does this stuff come from? Just Shaolin Temple's a bit generic. How did it get to my little town in the southeast of England? From all these generations and teachers and stuff. So you're right. It does still go on. And it's a bit of a shame. I think the real stuff, the kind of hardcore stuff that's got the real roots is still a bit harder to find, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned that you had your first exposure to Yi Quan in England. Who was this? Is he still there? Did he teach? Did he teach a lot?
He is a guy called Karel Kaskuba.
Okay.
So he's based in the south of England. and is also a student of Chen Qiao, so teaching Chen style.
Oh, right.
Background for many, many years, originally Yang style actually. And he's very, very good. He has I actually met up with him last year for the first time. I hadn't seen him since I left Hong Kong, 15 years before. We had dinner together and had a really good chat. And when I told him I was going to Hong Kong, it was him. It's a bit of an interesting story on this that suggested I try and find out the hand system of Yi Quan, because when he studied Yang style, he had very briefly met, believe it or not, Han Xing Yuen had come to London. So Han had, as you probably know, was quite the traveller. He went across, probably one of the first people to do overseas seminars. He would go and visit the US and Canada, and he came to London and stayed in Chu King Hong's Yang style Tai Chi school. He didn't teach anyone apart from Chu, interestingly enough. But Carell had very briefly met him and said, look, this guy's stuff, obviously he's passed away now. He passed away in 83. Yeah. But it was quite different from the Yi Quan, but he said, look, this guy's a real fighter. He was privately teaching Chu across there. Right. And there was a story at that time in London when a boxer had come into the school and had challenged, and Han had knocked him out in the class. And said, look, you should, if you go to Hong Kong, try and find that lineage, have a look at it. And he specifically asked me to research some. They do a set of techniques called the Sat Yi Tong Sao, which is hands, 12 hands. Okay. Which is only kind of unique in that style. And said, if you can see that, if you can find that, let me know. So that was my first calling point when I got to Hong Kong. Actually,
you went looking specifically for that.
I did. I mean, I did. And at that time, early 2005, Hong Kong people were not really putting a lot of their stuff on websites and internet, so it was quite difficult to find. Or if they did, it was in traditional Chinese. Right. So I went to the Qinwu Association in Jordan, or Jingmo, Cantonese. Yeah. And found somebody who spoke English within there, who spoke to somebody else, who spoke to somebody else, who had a timetable of classes that were running during the week. Of course, it was all written in Chinese. Yeah. And someone said, this one it's mind boxing, and it was on a Thursday, and I was like, that was the first week I was in Hong Kong, so I turned up for the class at 7 p.m. and that was the beginning of things.
And who was it that was teaching there?
It was Sifu Chan Tak Chuen, who has been a student of Han Xing Yuen for many, many, many years. Okay. Actually, I'll backtrack a little bit. So the class was run by his senior, Ip Hei Sing. Now, Mr. Ip, unfortunately, was very sick at the time that I went to the class. He had cancer. Oh, no. So he wasn't teaching, but his students were there. And Chan was his younger brother in the style, so he was taking over the class. Okay. And he died maybe a month or two after that, so I unfortunately didn't get the chance to meet Mr. Ip. Yeah. But I've heard a lot of good things about him. Within the class became split into two. So it became quite apparent that Mr. Chan had his own way of teaching and doing things. There was a student of Mr. Ip who probably his loyalty more didn't sit with his uncle, but with Mr. Ip. So the class very, very quickly split into two groups, and I was sort of given a choice on which one I wanted to train with. Mr. Chan was staying in the association in Qinwu, and the other teacher was taking the other group elsewhere, which was a good half of the class, actually. It was interesting that half of the class left to follow him, even though Chan was the more senior, but they were very different. For me, Mr. Chan, he did at that point, he spoke very, very little English, and my Cantonese was very basic then. But he ignored me for probably the first 3 or 4 times that I came, which isn't unusual. He probably thought, this guy's not going to come back. why waste my time with him?
Yeah.
There was one other foreigner there. There was a Russian guy there.
Oh, okay. I was about to ask.
But he spoke Mandarin. So as you know, most Hong Kong people, they're probably better in Mandarin than they are in English.
Yeah.
You know, depending on their background and where they're from. So he managed to get by on that. And
Well, depending on their generation
too.
You know.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's very true.
I've been in Hong Kong.
Quite a few factors.
Yeah, I've been in Hong Kong and I've spoken to older people trying to communicate with them in Mandarin, and they just kind of looked at me funny. And younger people, they at least can kind of communicate. But yeah, there's also a generational.
You're right. There is, and often if they're younger, if they haven't been overseas, their English isn't as good as the older generation, which is also quite.
That's also true. It's very interesting, right?
Yeah.
It's
the dynamics of Hong Kong, I suppose, in the changing demographics of it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But you know, so that's why I went with him, and plus the other teacher had actually hit me in the face as well, which I wasn't too happy about.
On day one?
So I wasn't too keen on joining across. It was on day one, yeah. He'd asked me to test my Jam Jong. So stupidly, I'd said that I'd done a little bit of each one before.
Right.
Massive mistake. Should never have. I should have turned up and said, you know, what's each one? But then again, it wasn't very plausible. Why is this guy turning up for each class if he doesn't know what he's doing? Yeah. He had his name was Som Siu-bo, and he through translation had said, look, put up your guard, your Jiangdong, and we'll test it. And at that point, as I said, I'd done very little each one before. I'd just got an introduction to it through Corral, which was great. And the standing that we'd done was it was quite relaxed, and it was more about feel and through one posture and relaxation and that. I hadn't gone deep into it at that point at all. And so I put my arms up and thinking he's going to test it by maybe poking and prodding and. So he just throws a really strong punch at me, which blasts obviously straight through my arms. And there's claret coming down my nose. So that was an interest, and I'm pretty sure they didn't expect me to come back after that as well. But I did. It's the only time I ever got hit in there, actually. Okay, well, I mean, sometimes it is like that, though. I mean, sometimes teachers do that irrespective. I've had that. I've seen that here multiple times. But yeah, that's weird, isn't it? There's that dynamic around it. Yeah. I mean, I've been at Yi Quan gatherings where they've hit each other in the face for no apparent reason. So. And it was supposed to be like that's just being friendly. Yeah, it was supposed to be like a happy, cordial lunch, and suddenly people are smashing each other for reasons I hadn't figured out. I mean, I don't think they even knew why they were doing it. It just it seemed like something to do. But are you sure there wasn't a few bottles of red wine on the table? There was a few bottles of consumed baijiu for sure. So, but that usually helps fuel things as well, doesn't it? Definitely, brings out a bit of healthy ego and slapping and stuff like that. It definitely got the party started, for sure. So you went on and you carried on with the teacher who had remained in Jinwu, correct? I did. I carried on, and we're still, I'm still training with him to this day. Okay. Some more than 15 years later, of a very close relationship with him. We became, we really took on that sort of Sifu student relationship. Became like a father to me. I was at his kid's wedding. He came to my wedding. Wow. We spent a lot of time together. When my parents would come out to visit Hong Kong, they'd come out for dinner with him as well, and his wife and his kids were older. But got to know them quite well, and we always laugh and joke about it because I always say that his English progressed a lot faster than what my Kung Fu did. After a few years of training together, we suddenly developed the ability to speak a lot more English. My Cantonese was slow to improve, but started to get there. And I say, Sifu, you I got some Kung Fu out of you, but you got a lot of English out of me. And we laugh about that, but he's a great guy, and he's still teaching in the association as well. He was due to come over this year for his first trip to the UK to do some seminars and meet my students and stuff, and unfortunately, because of the virus and stuff, we had to postpone and delay that. But
That's a pity.
that'll
That's a
happen.
pity.
Yeah, but that'll happen at some time. So that was a a consistent training for me, which became really my core style. But of course, being in Hong Kong and going to the other side of the world with a core idea of learning, I did manage to meet a lot of other teachers and training some other systems as well. So that first kind of year or two that I was there was dabbling and meeting teachers, and I did Bai Chi for a couple of years with a very very powerful, good teacher there who was from the north of China but traveled across from Shenzhen.
That's interesting that you
every day
you ended up in Hong Kong and you were doing Northern styles. From what it sounds like, I don't know what else you managed to dabble in there, but yeah, that's quite interesting.
Well, it was mostly Northern styles actually. So I spent a lot of time with CS Tang. I don't know if you know.
Yeah, I've actually been to his studio. It's interesting you mention him.
You?
Yeah, because I was down in Hong Kong for like I think what had happened was they had issued me the wrong visa type when I came in.
Right.
And I had to go out and renew it at the embassy in Hong Kong because you couldn't do it from within China. So I went down and I was there for about 3 days, and I had a friend there. And I was like, as insane martial artists do, the first thing you're doing on the ride down from Beijing is you're Googling Xing Yuen. Where's the Xing Yuen in Hong Kong? And actually, he was one of the only people that I had found on the internet, and I just got the address and I sent an email saying I'd like to come down and just say hi and just see. And then I recalled that he had written a book. So when I saw his website, I had recalled that he had written a book on Xingyi that I had. So I thought, okay, interesting opportunity to go see. And
and you're right. There's very little Xingyi in Hong Kong.
Yeah,
very little. He's probably the only one. He's the only one with a website at least.
Yeah, and I managed to pop down there. I popped down there, and it was his. I don't know if you've been to his studio, obviously, which is.
I have, yeah. I spent quite a lot of time there.
It's like an apartment building.
Was that in Wan Chai, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because he moved when I first got there. He was in Central.
Okay.
And then he moved around 2006, I think, to Wan Chai. Which he's on Hennessy Road, so it's just, but he's still there now.
Okay.
Being in the same place. It's full of books and videos, and I mean, he's a collector.
Yeah.
Every time I'd go there, you'd see more and more books stacked up. VHS videos, Betamax, DVDs, everything to do with martial arts.
Right.
He's had this lifetime obsession, and he's learned from a lot of people, and as well as being a teacher, and he teaches a lot of people, he invests a lot of time into his own training, and was and he's been very instrumental in each one, because he was I'm not sure whether he holds that post now, but at one time he was the secretary of the Hong Kong Yi Quan Association.
Right.
And he brought a lot of teachers to Hong Kong. He went up to Beijing a lot. I went to Beijing with him.
Okay.
But he brought Madam Wang, Wang Zhanghai's
daughter,
to Hong Kong. His own teacher is Li Jiangyu.
Right.
He passed away a few years ago. They're all kind of first generation from Master Wang, so he's very connected.
Yeah.
He knows a lot of people. And the thing about CS is everybody likes him.
Yeah.
He opens up doors. He's very friendly. He's very open. There's no ego there. So he's great.
Yeah.
If you get to know him and you want to meet other people and get introductions and stuff like that, he's a really good conduit for that.
Yeah. Well, what was surprising for me, because I'm used to training in Beijing. We train outside. Come hell or high water, literally. You're training outside. And when I went to his studio, I was surprised how they make do with such small spaces for training,
Yeah. Yeah. You see people, because he teaches a lot of weapons forms as well. And I've been down there and seen people like swinging broadswords around, stuff like that. So hold on, take 3 steps back and move around. A lot of interruptions to get it done.
Yeah.
To get the forms. But that's Hong Kong. I guess that's why Wing Chun was very popular as well, because hey, you don't need any space to do that.
Well, I've actually heard that
the environment suited to the style, right?
I've actually heard that there was a bit of a change when Yip Man was teaching in Hong Kong because of space constraints with regards to what he taught in certain aspects of the style compared to the Foshan style. I don't know how true that is, because I'm not a Wing Chun practitioner, and I'm not going to go in and try research this deeply myself. But I have heard that it did influence. So
it could be. I mean, I spent quite a bit of time in Guangzhou, and in fact, CS and I were good friends. We visited quite a big school in Guangzhou, Wing Chun school, just because it's one of his friends, and just kind of hang out. A guy called Mickey Wong.
Okay.
And their style, you're right, it is very, very different. There's a lot more footwork. There's a lot more moving around. It seems to be a bit longer range. It's quite different. So it could well be, the environment that changed the system. I wouldn't be surprised. It's one of the reasons why I like each one. It's one of the most convenient styles to train.
Yeah.
You can travel and be in a small hotel room, and you can just jump wherever you want. You don't need a lot of space, because it does it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, well, my teacher used to say this to me when I first started training Xing Yuen with him, and he's as crazy today about Xing Yuen as he was when he started training 50 something years ago, and he still talks about things. That's, if you're with him, that's what you're talking about. You're talking about martial arts all the time.
Yeah.
And I remember in the early days, he was sitting and telling me, like, after a training session, and I'd be in his apartment drinking tea, and he was like, Shanxi Xing Yiquan and Hebei Xing Yiquan, one of the key reasons for the slightly more expanded posture is the environments that they developed in, courtyards versus open areas out here in Hebei. It does kind of change things. And that stuck with me. And, I learned a big spear routine from him many years ago, but it's called Dali Hua Qiang, which means big pear blossom spear. Now there are different versions of it, but in general they refer to some form of spear practice. And the one he taught me had 19 sections, and
wow.
Yeah, it's a really long form, but we broke it up into 3, so it would be more manageable. But what was interesting, was each section going out was, lots of different spear techniques, but then coming back, it was Lu Qiang, when you tuck the spear behind you and retreat. Every even line. So line 1 was advancing or doing various techniques. And then every single retreating line was this technique, just walking back.
Same pattern.
Yeah, and I remember after I had learned that for, some years, and I have big spears at home that I train with as well. And I was training, the one afternoon it started raining, and I wasn't able to go downstairs to my usual area and train. And so I usually train in front of the elevator on my floor here, which is a corridor,
right.
And that's where I usually train anyway. If the weather's rainy or some reason, if the pollution is exceptionally bad, then I'll try avoid it and just train there. But I decided to take my spear there on that occasion, and I was just doing line drills, which is the core of our training in any case. And my spear, the one that I use to take downstairs, is a middle-sized spear. It's still pretty long. It's over 3 meters or so.
Okay.
But I was able to do a line out, and even diagonally, I couldn't turn the spear around in the corridor. It was too long. So I did one line out, and then I just walked back. And the second line I went out, I said, don't waste this opportunity. Do something in retreat. And I did that Lu Qiang and walked all the way back, and the penny dropped. I mean, it clicked. I was like, maybe the 19 roads were developed in a narrow area like this. Maybe that's why it was. So environment has a big part to play on how things get developed. You know, it's more related than people think.
It's interesting with forms because a lot of people just look at them as a collection of techniques, but often there's a message in there as well.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
there's something that it's not always apparent straight away, or it's trying to develop certain attributes.
Yeah.
It's not just this collection of techniques, but you're right. I mean, form is one thing. The other thing that CS told me that was really interesting was with his Gao style Bagua teacher Ho Choi. He said that he could tell when people had learned from Ho Choi by looking at their Bagua. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, when he was in his 50s, 60s, he was still quite strong and the posture was quite upright, and he'd be deep into his stance and the spine very erect and postures extended. And then when he was in the later years of his life, obviously, like an older guy, he started to stoop a little bit and come up. And he said, when someone shows me that circle walking, he said, no, you learned from year 19, blah, blah, to blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So it's all these different things that affect things. You've got environment and also when you learn from your teacher as well, it can affect the style, because that's quite important, because, when a style is more extended in postures, you think, well, that's a long range style. Well, actually, it can also be the physical condition of the practitioner as well.
Yeah, I've seen that
so
too.
There's loads of different things. Yeah, it's weird, isn't it?
I've seen that even with people that trained with my teacher. I know if they've trained with my teacher just by certain things. But the other thing is, as my teacher's gotten older, he's also, I've seen him focus differently in his own training. So, I trained with him from before this, so I could see a difference in him.
Yeah.
But people that have only started, well, he doesn't really take new students anymore. And, I think those days are basically done. But people that have come more recently and learned from him, they're not gonna learn the same way we did in the beginning. So it's true, and you could also see it. Yeah, you could see it with body shapes. A lot of people don't realize a lot of the postures that came out of the Taiwanese lines of Xingyi and Bagua have a lot to do with the body shapes of those people that handed them down. And they don't know that, so they sit and think, no, it has to be like this, with the arm curled.
Yeah, exactly.
Curled,
copy.
Curled in a certain way. Meanwhile, they're curling it in a certain way because of the shape of the teacher's body, not necessarily the requirement per se.
And that's really kind of unique to Chinese martial arts. I've spent a lot of time in Western boxing. Boxed as an amateur as a kid, and then when I got into Hong Kong, I did a lot of white collar and stuff like that.
Okay.
And still train boxing to this day now. But if you look at the Western idea of a coach, you take a student and you bring out their attributes and you teach them something that will be suited to their personality, their physical shape, their condition, all those kind of things. But in Chinese martial arts, often this is as much from the student as the teacher. We kind of become, as you're alluding to there, obsessed with copying the teacher's form, and the founder did it this way, so it's incorrect if you don't do it like that.
Yeah.
Without sort of thinking a bit deeper into it, is that really the essence of it?
Yeah.
I'm not sort of saying that everyone should have 100 different ways to do something, but things have to be adapted for your own physicality at the same time as well.
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen that I've been releasing these restored and subtitled videos of Li Ziming, who's my teacher's teacher.
I have, yeah, they're great. Yeah, really good.
Well, it's very interesting because a lot of the footage that you can actually see of him, he's already very old, Li Ziming, in there. And, that's the other thing. Like, even my teacher was telling me about how things changed because, of the physical decline as he got old. But that people that came and learned in those older times, that's the Bagua that they practiced as young people, Yeah. And they then taught it down.
That's not right.
No, it's not right. But they don't know any different, Well,
the parallel with that is in Wing Chun is they filmed Yip Man doing the forms and the dummy days before he passed away. So you've probably seen it going around, that old black and white footage. And he's so sick, he stops.
Yeah.
He stops halfway between it. And he's leaning back, and he is not a well man when you film that stuff. But that's been put out there as a holy grail, and with Wing Chun you can see there's so many different lineages and ways of doing it. And I always look to Wing Chun because it's so popular. You can see where it's become corrupted in many ways as well, of people saying they've got the special unique one, and that's being there since the day. But some people have held those videos in such high esteem of, that is the way to do it, rather than saying, that's a guy who was in really ill health on his last legs and was, rapidly filming that stuff for everybody, and it should be taken in that light. No disrespect to him, but it was a record of the sequence of techniques. Rather than, I'm sure, 20 years prior to that, he wouldn't have been performing it like that.
Yeah, it was just for reference.
It's interesting how people perceive things. Yeah, for reference.
My teacher's got he's full of these little aphorisms that he's compiled to help with training, and he's his mentality is like, he would say to me very often, knowing, if you know something I've taught you, it's not enough. You've got to understand it. And if you understand, it's also not enough. You've got to feel it. So that's where this has to be applied to even these people that might be referencing or referring to an old video of a teacher and trying to say that this is how it should be done out of purely aesthetic, perspectives. Well, that's just one part of that three-part equation. So if while you're doing that, you imitate, let's just say, for example, a certain way of doing it, you understand it, what the technique is, you've got an understanding of how to exit, but when you do it, it feels wrong, then there's something wrong, Sure, you could say that feeling wrong and right is an issue of experience, but I'm talking about over time. If over time and experience there's still something that feels off about it, then most generally something's off with how it's being done. So you need to correct it.
Absolutely.
You need to correct it. So
yeah. You do, and you still, to whatever you do, you have to apply the same basis of mechanics.
Yeah.
And body structure, which exists in everything, not just Chinese martial arts, and how your body moves and how your joints align. And once you start, breaking that, I remember quite a few years ago in Hong Kong, a good friend of mine who was teaching Wing Chun, and we were traveling on the MTR, and got into a conversation, as you do, about different things and about stance. And I was a bit mean. I kind of set him up, and I just said to him, and I noticed in his style, he leans back a lot, especially when he's doing the first form and the Sulim Tao in the stance, and hips really pushed forward, which is obviously the opposite of what we do in internal martial arts.
Yeah.
And dropping the body weight, he was kind of, full on pelvic tilt going on there.
Yeah.
And I said to him, so why do you do that? And he said, well, it makes you really strong. It's a very strong stance because you have this tension running through the body into one piece. And I was like, really? And then of course he started to do on the MTR, which came to a sudden halt, and then flew back, and the conversation kind of ended from there.
So where are we going?
Point illustrated. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'd like to get back to your studies of Yi Quan in Hong Kong and what it was like. I mean, specifically, you were learning a system that came through Han. What was that like?
Yes.
Yeah. So please do go right ahead.
It was really interesting, and then also, it led me to another teacher, because as you, I guess we'll get onto that, but there's two Han brothers.
Yeah.
There's Han Xing Yuen, who's the younger, often known as Little Han, and Big Han, Han Xing Qiao. Han Xing Yuen had emigrated to Hong Kong, so brought Yi Quan there and developed a school, etc. His older brother had gone to Zhuhai, and was teaching across there. So at this point in time, for my first 5-6 years, I was purely learning from Chan Tak Chuen and the Han Xing Yuen line, and it was a lot of basics. It was we'd start training with 45 minutes of Jam Zhong on the beginning of every lesson, and he was very hands-on with corrections. We go through a variety of postures. Within that line of each one, there's 8 postures. So you'd be holding each one for 5 minutes or so, but in a very low stance.
Yeah.
And he would correct if you weren't sitting into your quad correctly and your arms weren't high enough. So the arm, compared to some styles of Yi Quan, or some people who do Jam Zhong, and this is another thing that kind of irritates me, is people who practice Jam Zhong thinking they know Yi Quan. They're two different things. Jamjong plays a very large part within each one, but just because you practice in each one doesn't mean that you understand and practice each one. If you practice Jamjong, same as if you know, everyone knows how to throw a jab, but it doesn't mean you're a boxer.
Right.
So the training was it was very hands-on, as I mentioned. So we go through the postures, lots of corrections, lots of testing. So within some schools of each one, they tend to do the Silik or Shili Mandarin, a separate so
power testing or force testing.
We do it as but we do it within the Jamjong session. So the Chan would come along and get everyone to do small movements and be testing all the time, be pushing, be applying force, teaching you how to store energy and release basically through the posture. So it was very, very active, and it was very difficult. That time especially in the summer, it was an enclosed room. There was no air conditioning. There was one. Did you visit the Chinwu Association?
No, I didn't.
It's great if you ever get a chance to go. It's like stepping into a museum.
Okay.
It's been there since the 60s. So they've got different teachers are teaching on different evenings, and they've got all the old photographs.
Oh wow.
From years gone by, and there's a dummy and weapons that have been there. It's a really interesting place to go, but geez, it's hot in the summer. You're up on the 12th floor, and you get that room full of people doing, quite difficult jamjong.
Yeah.
And it's pools of sweat on the floor and stuff like that. So it was really hard, and he was a stickler for absolute perfection around that.
Right.
And then we'd go on from there and do some bag work. We do all sorts of different things, and within hands, each one there's a very large shingi component as well.
Okay. Well, maybe you want to give a little bit of
doing that.
Maybe you want to give the listeners a bit
background
of
on those guys?
on Han, because I'm sure some people have no clue.
Yeah, it's an interesting story.
Yeah.
They won't, and so I mean the two Han brothers, Han Xing Qiao and Han Xing Yuen, they were very accomplished martial artists. Their father had a great Han Yusan had a great lineage in Xingyi and Bagua, and also in wrestling.
Okay.
He learned directly from Li Kunyu and Zhang Jiaodong.
All right.
So they grew up as being taught from a very early age this stuff, and were well known.
Okay.
Then the older brother. And they were quite different. They were very different in terms of personality and physicality and stuff we talked about before. But the older brother met Wang Zhanghai.
Okay.
And began to learn Yi Quan, which was quite unusual because that was quite late after he was already you would say was teaching, was very well accomplished and stuff like that. So he met this guy and thought, well, was obviously impressed enough to go and train with him. The younger brother was less enthused by that time, and let's just say part of the personality. He was a bit more of a fighter. He was a bit more scrappy and pragmatic in his approach. And so Master Wang had heard of him and said, to Big Han, why don't you bring your little brother up for some training? So he came along one night, and at that time, so this would be in Shanghai in the 30s.
Okay.
This period of time, and it was very, very fighty. It was almost like an MMA club in terms of their approach to testing and fighting, and they sparred and everything else. It was pretty full on. And of course, they asked Han to spar with one of Master Wang's students, and Han knocked him straight out.
Oh, really?
So this came directly from Sifu Chan, who'd heard it from Han. Said he used a bagua covering palm technique and just knocked the guy straight out, and said, well, there's not much going on here. Thanks, but no thanks. And then went away. And then a few weeks later, Wang said, do you want to bring your brother back along again? He said, well, actually, whether he'll come, but yeah, we'll get him. So he comes back along, and this time Wang says to him, do you want to spar? And Han's like, sure. So Han goes to attack him with a bunk chuan.
Yeah.
And Wang just does a bunk chuan straight back at him, hits him in the face and knocks him out. And then he, this is a true story, and then he comes back around and he says, I wasn't ready. I didn't get the chance to express my power. I'm not ready. And Wang says, okay, let's go again. So he tries again, and this time Wang hits him in the ribs. And he goes down and he starts vomiting blood.
Yeah.
Apparently the story goes. And from that period in time, he trained with Wang, so he became one of the students as well. Okay. Although his older brother was, one of the top four. They call them, the four protectors or Buddhas or whatever.
Yeah.
Of Wang. So they both had very different experiences. But and his older brother, he became exposed to Lockup Ba.
All right.
So, because as you know, Wang was very good friends with Wu Yi.
Right.
Who allegedly had defeated him and stuff, and he sent these 4 students across there. The younger brother didn't, so that's where their styles became quite different. And that led me later on to research and study Lockup Ba as well.
Okay.
So the curriculum on younger Han's style, which I was learning, was very focused on Xingyi.
Okay.
On the basics of Xingyi. So we would hold Santi for long periods of time within the Jam Zhong. We trained 5 elements.
Yeah.
Very slowly, trying to get perfection in a low stance for feel. So that was very much part of the early curriculum to practice that. And then of course a lot of time was spent on this the 12 hands that I mentioned before, the Sap Yi Tong Sao.
Well, you mentioned that you did 8.
It's bespoke to him.
Yeah, you mentioned you did 8 Zhanzhuang postures.
Yeah.
Do you care to mention any of them?
Sure. I mean, obviously, the Jamjong postures are important. The first one is the typical posture that you see everyone kind of embracing, or Peng Zhong.
Yeah.
Holding the ball with the hands.
Hun Yuan.
In our style, we hold that. Yeah, exactly. We hold that quite high. So a lot of people hold it at the chest or even lower level.
Yeah.
And it was really stressed upon us that this is your active guard. This is how you fight.
Yeah.
So if you move into any kind of the first thing you do is lift your hands up, same as you do in boxing, and you raise a guard. So this was your guard position. So that was still always the primary zhong that we learned.
Yes.
And then the other postures. So the hands are in various different positions, and you'd be looking to store and release energy within those. And get the 6 directions, backwards, forwards, up, down, left, right, through those postures. So, raising from, the second one would be pushing down, and then the arms would come down to sort of holding the ball in a lower position, which Sifu always said was very good for training Bong Chuan for that one.
Okay.
And, various different, and of course you've got within each posture, the mind element of using this imagery, if you like, I call it mind isometrics.
Okay.
So rather than using muscle isometrics, where you push against a movable object and generate force through your muscles and tendons and things like that, in each one you're doing it with your mind. So you're imagining doing something, you're not actually doing it, but then it puts a certain set of conditions into the body, and it does train your tendons and ligaments and posture, but without doing it in a really sort of hard Gan kind of way. And my early training, as everyone who starts internal martial arts gets, the phase that I would always hear is Fang Song, relax, which is always hard when you're in a really low stance, and sweat's dripping off you, and someone's pushing against you and testing you and all that kind of stuff. It becomes contradictive. Yeah. And then, well, I found my experience is that after a period of time, and I talk about this story in the book as well, is the penny kind of just dropped, and that feeling that you're looking for came. It didn't come on gradually. When a couple of years of I would say struggling and trying to get frustrated and get that kind of feeling through the jam zhong. And then, it came, and I remember when it came, I had a really bad cold. I had a really bad head cold, and I thought, shall I go to training or shall I not go to training? And I went, and we were going through the jam zhong, and geez, I was hot and sweating, and I got to the point where I just didn't give a shit anymore. I felt so awful. I just stopped caring. And then the first time, Sifu came to me, he went, good. And I went, what? He went, you're really strong. That's really good. And I was like, I feel like shit. But I suddenly realized that I was kind of, embracing the ball, and I could feel the energy around me from doing it, because I guess I'd stopped wanting it. For one thing, because I didn't care at that point.
Right.
And I knew very quickly I'd got something there, and it's almost like kind of that point when you teaching my kids how to ride a bike and they first start pedaling. It's like, okay, you got to keep that now. You've got that feeling. Don't lose it. Do not lose it.
Right.
And of course, if you're doing it correctly, you don't. And that was quite a transformation and change, actually. And I try to, teaching that to people is difficult, though.
No, I know. It is. You mentioned
hard.
You mentioned that you guys would start with about 45 minutes of Jan Zhuang. I mean, it's very similar to, and this is something that's also not very well known in general, that Xing Yi Quan, and definitely Hebei line of Xing Yi Quan that I practice it's full of like Jan Zhuang. We have San Ti Shi, of course, is the core. But we have Xianglong, Jianglong, descending dragon, Fu Hu, subduing the tiger. Those are static. But then we also have a whole bunch of Jan Zhuang methods that have movement. And that's actually the main core of Jan Zhuang that we do. Especially that's what my teacher taught me. It's not taught outside. And we don't show it to outsiders in general. But that is an hour of our initial training, at least. That's what we do.
So would they be similar to Shili type stuff?
Very similar.
When they do micro movements.
I'll tell you because the Neigong, these methods, these Zhuangfa that my teacher taught me, when over the years when I've asked him where it came from his teacher, and he said, for the most part, it's said to have come through Guo Yunshen and Li Cunyi, the versions that we do. And this kind of made me think, because we have a specific type, one of them, which at certain points in the movement look like your Yi Quan's fighting posture. It goes through to that point, and it goes further than that, but it's very much focused on that.
You mean like the combat stance?
Exactly, Qi Zhuang. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And but it's got a big. We do it with a much bigger range of motion, sinking and going all the way back up, and sinking and going all the way back up. And my teacher said, there's a lot that Wang Shangjai took from Xing Yi, stuff that he focused, that he really liked. And then he developed into focused aspects in Yi Quan. So a lot of people seem to think that just Yi Quan came out of thin air. I mean, of course, it was based on the genius of the practitioner.
I totally agree with you.
But it's there in Xing Yi, and it seems to have been lost. I mean, we do it, but I haven't seen many people that do it. And even my
maybe it's more in indoor training, isn't it? Really, it's higher level. It's not necessarily because it's secret, but it's because before you start doing that, you need to build up a certain level of power through the Jam Zhong first.
Well, that was it.
Before you can start to do the movements.
That was it.
So it's a process.
Yeah,
it's a training process.
And even my teacher used to say to me,
if you teach people that too quickly, they can't do it.
Yeah, my teacher would say that. It's okay if you're busy during the day and you don't have time to do all your elements and all your techniques, but you got to do this stuff every day. And it's so true.
Yeah.
It's so true.
Cool. Yeah. It's that less is more of the really deep minimalistic training. And I think, you bang on that.
Yeah.
Wang had a real heavy background in Xing Yi from Gao Yongshen.
Yeah.
And you then take that with the Han brothers who had that from their father, Hebei Xing Yi as well.
Yeah.
And then this period of time when my teacher's teacher was learning each one was when it was the Xingyi element was probably a lot stronger then as well.
Yeah.
So you've got this kind of concoction going on. And I think later on during time, because you know each one's like a lot of things. If you look at the later development of it into the 40s and 50s, etc., it starts to change, and I think there's various different reasons for that. And what you would class now as Beijing type each one, you can see less of the Xingyi in it, and their movement, the way they move, and stance, and postures and stuff like that. And that I'm not that I'm saying that it's not as effective or not as, but it's different. It's clearly very different. If you look at Han Xing Yuen to Yao's and other schools around there, it's very, very different. So I think that at that period of time there was a really strong correlation. I agree with you. I think Wang Zhanghai was a Xingyi guy who then went out and did more research, and he tested, and he was an incredible character for that period of time, who talked more about his losses than his wins. He wanted to test. He didn't care if he lost. He saw it as a learning experience. And many you look at some of the teachers who some of his students who were teachers who went to learn from him as well. And he then sent his students to other people as well, which is, that you wouldn't see that happening so much these days in Chinese martial arts. It's as I've said, that's why I say it's more like a kind of modern day MMA type of approach. It's like, well, he's good at grappling. I'm more of a stand-up. Go across and learn BJJ from him.
Right.
And you will all get together and spar, and if you beat me, fantastic.
I might have.
It's always it's an interesting time.
Yeah, I might have said this on a previous episode of the podcast, but my grand teacher, his name was Zhao Zhong. My teacher's main teacher, his first teacher, his Xingyi teacher, and Zhao Zhong was a very, very hard man. Let's put it that way. He was from that generation. So, my teacher's already an old generation, so you can imagine the generation we're talking about. Well,
tough as nails.
Yeah, they all lived in the area with the Yao family. Zhao Zhong and Yao Zongshun were actually very, very close friends. Very, very close friends. So, there was a lot of interaction there, and it's because of that relationship that even to this day, whenever there's a Yi Quan gathering, they'll call my teacher. So even though my teacher's not a Yi Quan practitioner, and I've joined him a few times, that's where I told you about that one of those instances where
those gatherings.
But so
there's a good friendly vibe between the group.
Well, there is friendly. There's always the Yi Quan guys are always going to be very. They're going to collectively share animosity for one another. That's the best way I can put it, but it goes with the territory anyway.
True.
My teacher did his studies of Xingyi with his teacher, and later on he wanted to learn more leg methods. Okay, my full confession, my teacher used to also go around and test himself out with different martial artists he'd bump into in a park, and he bumped into a guy who did Chuojiao, and he got kicked a couple of times, and he was like, I need to work on that. So he wanted to go learn Chuojiao, and as you said, there was a much more MMA type of idea there going on. Like his teacher took him to Wu Bin Lo to make the introduction for him to learn Chuojiao Fanzi, And it was his teacher after, and my teacher had pennies, the times we're talking about. He took all the pennies that he could to buy a meal for Wu Bin Lo. They sat down with his teacher in Wu Bin Lo. And my teachers recalled the story to me so many times. He even told me what they ordered with those pennies. And halfway through the conversation, his Xingyi master, his master, just said to him, all right, so get on your knees because Wu Bin Lo is going to take you now to teach you Chuojiao. So it was very much different to the ideas that we have today with this hatred of each other and this idea of,
we're the best, we've got something special, and you didn't get it.
This style sucks, and there's nothing to learn there. And
you know what my theory on it is, Byron, is I'll tell you what I think happened. People stopped fighting.
100%.
People stopped fighting and testing.
Yeah.
And then what happened is ego took place and people got insecure, and they, because they weren't testing it. It's, we look at this modern environment of combat, and you know, as I mentioned before, I spent a lot of time in boxing, and I trained Thai boxing for many years as well.
Yeah.
You go into those gyms, you get friendliness. Honestly,
Yeah.
you can get some tough sparring and stuff,
Oh,
but
totally.
generally you don't get the ego.
Yeah.
And it's much more friendly. It's much more, oh, who did you learn from, and blah 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 blah. But geez, you step into someone else's Chinese martial arts school. Can you imagine getting the same, you know, kind of vibe these days?
Yeah.
It just, even with an introduction, it's very different. And you know, and I think there's various different reasons. I mean, we've become more civilized. Obviously, it was more violent times back then, and there's more law and order now. You can't just go around.
Well, it depends on what you consider being civilized, but okay.
True. But you know, it was a time of, you know, impending war and nationalism and stuff like that. So, you know, things have changed, and then you've got the change in political landscape in China, which I think had an impact and you know, we always go back to pushing hands, because, you know, it doesn't exist within the hand system. You know, demonstrate a couple of things, and we do a lot of testing within Jamjong on you know, getting contact point and pushing and releasing and storing and stuff like that. But we never ever practiced any pushing hands.
That's great you said that, because my teacher said the same thing.
It's huge in the other. Well, it's huge in other styles, and I've heard so many things around it that it's so high level and teach you how to fight and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you know, and I asked my secret belt, and he said, look, you know, Han didn't push around. He liked to hit.
Exactly what my teacher said about Xing Yi. He said, we don't push each other. We don't do push hands, because we hit each other. Yeah.
Of course. That's combat. It's effective. And if you're pushing people around, you don't learn. All you learn from that is bad habits.
Yeah.
You won't learn how to fight from doing that. You the Jamjong and the Silat training and everything you're on around it will teach you, if you do happen to get a contact point within a fight, what to do with that and how to control.
Exactly.
But within the context of push hands, going back to how much it's changed, it's a very good environment to control people. If someone gives you a contact point, you can do whatever the hell you want to them. You can apply a joint lock, you can throw them around.
Yeah.
But you know, and it sounds like your teacher is very combative as well. No one's going to give you that contact point in a real fight.
Well, go try with a.
Try a game of tag.
Yeah.
Try a game of tag. I get my kids to play tag with me. I can't get a contact point on them.
Well, never mind. You can go outside. You know, I've seen it. Like, I mean, I've grappled for years, and go to a no-gi session. So there's no excuses about grips and whatever on clothes. Yeah. Go to a no-gi session with a guy who's done grappling for 6 months. Never mind somebody even with a higher belt. Somebody who's done it for 6 months, and see if you can maintain that contact that you do in push hands with him. You can't. Because as soon as he's got a very basic understanding of combat, it becomes so hard to actually maintain that. It's almost it's like chasing the moon. It kind of becomes fruitless, you know, to try to do that specifically. Yeah. So
and it's very far removed from combat.
Yeah.
From martial arts and from the essence that we do. So we never spend any time doing that. But of course, you know, and I'm sure there's some value in practicing it.
Sure.
We don't do it because it's far removed from the essence of the style, and it won't lead to a certain set of skills that you may be thinking that you're going to get from practicing it.
Yeah.
The time will be better invested elsewhere, in my opinion.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's probably, I mean, my teacher would say it's a good little tool that you can use every now and then, but don't let it become the be-all and end-all. For Xing Yi, he himself says he doesn't think it's got a place amongst our tactics and methods, but for other styles, for sure, you know, it probably has value, but don't get stuck on it. So, and you know, it's interesting. You also mentioned, like, people, if they're savvy and they're paying attention in these videos that I've released of Li Ziming, and the very few things that you can see of him, never mind the moving stuff, but some photos of him with his students, you might notice that if they're savvy, they'll notice something. There's a recurring theme in all of those little bits and pieces. He's almost always applying something on the student. He's almost always either locking, breaking, or doing some sort of a technique on the, which which seems to be something alien to Bagua people today. You know, it's so interesting to see the change. It's so interesting.
It is. It is. It is, and it's, you know, it gets into the whole bigger conversation on the credibility on what we do, and the delusion that certain things will work, and then it goes into that, you know, fighting environment, and of course it doesn't. Or how do you correlate what you do to free fighting? That if you know, do practice some kind of free fighting, then it becomes just like sandar or kickboxing or whatever, that then doesn't have any connection to the practice that you do. So it's you know, it's a whole kind of loaded conversation.
It is.
But you know, as you know, it wasn't like that back in the day.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to hear some more about. We started off with your training with Han. You got into it. We kind of started talking about other things. So please, with the Han system.
Yeah, so I continued with Chan Tak Chuen for many years. He's still my teacher, and you know, during my whole kind of 12 years in Hong Kong, trained with him several times a week, and he would teach me privately at his home on at the weekend as well. Now I was, as I mentioned, I was sort of researching and sussing out different teachers and styles in Hong Kong. One thing I was really keen to learn was the lockup ba fa, luhe ba fa. Because of the connection that it's always had with Yi Quan, and it interested me. So I found a couple of teachers, and I wasn't really enamored with it. And you know, of course, you have one teacher; it's not a reflection on the whole style or system. But I couldn't really see what the fuss was. And then I picked up one of the Chinese martial arts magazines in Hong Kong, and there was an article on a guy teaching in Qingyi, which was close to where I lived in the New Territories, which was close. And I sent him an email. We had a little bit of conversation, and then I ended up meeting him. His name was Hui Kit Wah. And he had learned Lehe Ba Fa in Beijing from a gentleman named Lu Guoyao.
Okay.
He was a student of Wu Hui. And found him to be very, very powerful and connected. It soon became very quick in the conversation that he was also an Yi Quan practitioner, but he learned his Yi Quan from Han Xing Qiao in Zhuhai.
Okay.
So I immediately said, well, we're kind of the same family. But his Yi Quan was quite different to what I did. So I started to train with Mr. Hui, and this would be around 2009, 2010, and alongside training in Jingmo with Chan, and we went through all of it. At first, I was quite reticent to learn his Yi Quan because you know, I was already practicing that, and so we just concentrated on the Lehe Ba Fa. And then after a period of time, of course, it starts to creep in, and I couldn't help myself. So I realized that he had this whole system of Yi Quan that was very different to what I've been learning and practicing. And you know, how can two brothers who had similar backgrounds and learned from the same teacher have developed such different systems? You know, the jump jongs were completely different, some of the feel and exercises and footwork and all sorts of stuff. But they were very complementary, but just totally different. I think, you know, there was the experience. Well, it's the things we talked about in the beginning. It was the experiences that they had. Maybe the physical environments were different that they were in. They had very different physical statures as well. The big Han was taller and slimmer, and they, you know, exposed different styles as well. There's that Lehe Ba Fa element. So you know, Mr. Hui also became my teacher, and I became his indoor student as well.
Okay.
And learned both styles. And you know, was quite. You know, it's funny. If I'd been Chinese, I probably wouldn't have been able to do that. But sometimes you probably see that as a Westerner, you can do clumsy things and make mistakes and get away with it a bit more. And it's kind of, and I remember times when I was in Jingmo, and you'd have some of the senior students who've been with Chan for 20 years say, why are you teaching him that? You know, why is, oh, the Western doesn't really matter. So I was fortunate to be put in this position of getting some of this training almost by default, by accident, by clumsiness. And that was really good. So I have continued this day to have a close relationship with both teachers and open about that, and the styles. And Chan Tak Chuen also opened up his own learning to, you may not know this, to Magway Bagua.
Oh, really?
So he went to Beijing. So after everyone likes to have a teacher. So after younger Han died, it's an interesting story around this. A lot of his senior students from Han Xing Yuen, including Chan, went to Zhuhai to visit the older brother, and they were quite keen to continue to have him as their teacher, even though they were accomplished and at a certain level.
Of course, yeah.
And Han Xing Qiao was quite reticent to take them on and said, look, you've learned from my brother, and I don't really want to teach you because the way we do things is different, not for better or for worse. But if I teach you, it's kind of like criticizing him by teaching you something different.
Right.
So I don't think it's going to work. It's not going to work to do that. So Chan and his Sihing, his senior brother, Han Xing Qiao, they went to Beijing and they found the Magway style.
Okay.
Through Yu Ziming, and they learned from him.
Which
now it's interesting because there was a Bagua connection with the Han system, but they were less open about teaching that so much.
Which year was that?
Oh gosh, I'm not 100% sure. I'm guessing it would be sometime probably around the early 90s.
Okay.
Because it was by the time I was early to mid 90s, I think that relationship was about a decade old when I started training at Taijiquan. So alongside his Yi Quan, we moved in that direction as well.
So he studied with.
Fact,
I didn't hear the name of the person that he was learning by.
Mr. Yu Ziming.
Yu Ziming. I'd have to, maybe if I get the characters, I'll take a look. But off the top of my head, it's not ringing bells. But I mean, there's a.
Well, he was one of the main Magway branch that we see spread around the world.
Okay.
Today. He was he passed away a few years ago. I think within the last 5 years. Was the main teacher of that branch, and because obviously Magway's become quite popular around the world.
Yeah.
Through that lineage and through another teacher.
Yeah.
So I had some exposure to that as well.
Li Baohua is one of the more prominent.
He learned from Yu Ziming. Yu Ziming was his sifu as well.
I see. Okay, so they had the same teacher.
It's the same lineage. Yeah, it's the same lineage. I haven't met Mr. Lee myself.
He's in Japan.
But right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So but rather than sort of fully take it on that route, I found that the Lehe Ba Fa was more interesting for me.
Okay.
I suppose it's also a testimony to the skill and background of Hui Kit Wah and the way that he taught and his understanding of it. He's a very different than Sifu Chan in terms of his personality. He's got a background as an IT engineer. So he takes things apart and re-engineers.
Okay.
Martial arts background as well. It's really deep, yeah. But he's a fighter. I mean, he grew up on a tough housing estate in Hong Kong.
Right.
He told me about his early life, with kind of organized gangs around.
Yeah.
Stuff and what it was like. And he learned martial arts to protect himself. So the up until this day, the journey kind of continues with both teachers and with these lines that are one family, if you like, through hand style. Each one, but it's unusual to become exposed to both sides of it from the brother and from both brothers, and as I've mentioned, they're really different. Really
well,
different.
It is quite unique, quite a unique direction of Yi Quan that went through them, and especially with what you're saying with regards to the Liu He Ba Fa incorporation. So that would definitely it's like adding a different spice to the pot. It makes things taste different. So
it is, yeah. I don't know if you've seen any videos the older Han.
I have, but a
There's not
long
as
time
much
ago.
out there,
Yeah.
and you can see, yeah, you can see when he does his Jianwu, you know, that health dance. It's very different from how other Yi Quan people do it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've had any exposure to Lohe Bafai, you can see a lot of the movements and exposures in terms of what he did. Although interesting, when I asked, Sifu Hoi, did he actually teach Lohe Bafai's part? He said no, he didn't. He didn't teach the form. So Wang had sent, these four Buddha warrior protectors to learn from Wu Hoi, but I don't think they spent a long time. They got exposed to it, and it wasn't necessarily from learning the form and in a formal way.
Right.
So again, it probably goes back to this whole kind of, well, let's get together and do some jamming and I'll show you how this system works.
Yeah.
And, we'll do some sparring and some fighting and stuff like that. So he didn't formally teach it, which is why Mr. Hoi had to seek out another teacher himself to get the background within it and to formally learn it, if you like.
It's quite interesting. I have I have an acquaintance who he was in the early days of the wushu sport movement one of the kings of Southern Fist. He was one of the most well-known and successful Southern athletes, but he comes from a pretty strong Southern traditional martial art background. I mean, his teacher, who I also knew, I had the pleasure of learning with him like a little bit in my early 20s, and he was a Choi Lei foot guy, and he was involved in the official team.
Okay. Yeah.
So a lot of their team basics and even the style basics for the sports side of it. This is the guy that developed the standardized so-called routines, but it was based on Choi Lei foot and some Hungar as well. But
interesting.
But this guy...
So he was a fighting guy who developed those routines?
Well, the first generation routines. It's changed a lot since then. We can't really compare the initial group of people to what's happened since, but that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
This guy went on to become... He still is the national Southern style coach, and he's a very good person. He's got a lot of traditional knowledge, but of course he's in an environment that he's doing the work with a specific within a specific environment, so there's not so much he can do there. But he told me privately that actually he studies Liu He Bafa in Guangdong. He studies Liu He Bafa, and he's done it for decades. He said that's his personal practice. He actually doesn't practice any of his Southern stuff. He only practices Liu He Bafa on his own. And that was quite interesting. So yeah.
Did he go into any further detail about why or what the sort of practice involved?
Oh yeah, because he only opened up because he knew when he had found out that I was doing Xingyi and Bagua that was my core, even though I was working within the field, but my core was traditional Xingyi and Bagua. So he only opened up then, and he said for him that's just a sublime art, and it's got value and benefits that he can't explain, but it's just that was it for him. So yeah,
it's interesting because it's such a rare art.
Yeah,
it's still very hard to find anywhere these days, whether it's China, Hong Kong, or in the West. And it's also vastly misunderstood.
Yeah.
People who get led to it, they've normally got a background in doing something else.
Yeah,
and that then permeates into kind of what is the flavor of Lohe Bafai. So you see a lot of videos of people who perform it like Tai Chi.
Right.
Chi type stepping and movement, which it really isn't. It has a distinct flavor to it. It's water boxing. It's up and down. It's meant to be like crashing waves, so that the stepping is completely different from Tai Chi, and the movements within it. It's not a combination of Bagua or Xingyi. It's quite unique.
Yeah.
And a lot of my personal practice and teaching is taken up with the Lohe Bafai as well, as much as each one. I get a lot from the practice.
Right.
And I find that it's an expression of energies.
Yeah.
And harmony of the body. It's for me, practicing is a bit like doing the Shili.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Putting that into the form from the Jam Chong.
Yeah. So let's get into that. I mean, you are teaching where you are. You have a
Yes.
okay. And well, what do you? Where are you teaching? What is the?
Where am I teaching? Yeah. So I came back to the UK around 3-4 years ago, and relocated my family back across here as well.
So your whole family had gone with you across there.
No, I brought a family back.
Ah.
So I met my wife in Hong Kong, and it's one of the reasons why we left. I mean, we love living there, so she's from there.
Yeah.
And I've got 3 kids under the age of 10.
Okay.
It's a busy family life along with training.
Right.
And I think we were on kid number 2 had just been born when we left. And Hong Kong it's a brilliant place, but it's with a large growing family. It's not the best to bring up both from a space perspective and economically.
Yeah.
And education. So although people always say why did you come back? And I said, well, when I went to Hong Kong, it was never meant to be a permanent move anyway. In my head, I was thinking about going across there for a couple of years.
Yeah.
I didn't know I was going to end up staying for 12 years.
Yeah.
So I didn't really have a long-term game plan in mind. Life takes you in different directions, and it felt from a family perspective, it felt like the right time to leave.
Well, it's as that hip hop band Outkast says in their song Miss Jackson. You can plan a pretty picnic, but you can't predict the weather. So.
I love that song. Actually. Yeah, it's true. Hey, yeah.
Exactly.
So. Yeah, it's great. That's a great quote.
It's actually Hey, you're right. I thought it was Miss Jackson. Sorry.
That's all right. It's fine. We'll do a separate hip hop podcast.
Okay.
Try and get the Wu-Tang Clan to join.
All right, protect your neck. Yeah. So
yeah, you're completely thrown.
Oh, sorry, you were saying about your move back.
That's all right. No, it's fine. So I came back and I was always in the intention to start teaching, and training's never gone away. I always say I'm a practitioner first and a teacher second,
right.
And that's never ever going to change in my life. If I only had 1 hour a day left to spare, I would do a training, not teaching. So practice is the most important thing for me, and I found that when I left, it's interesting that my practice improved a lot faster after I left, because I guess I didn't have to rely on my teacher being there to ask a lot of questions and to go through things. I had to assimilate everything that I'd done, which was a vast amount of material over the years, and then try to somehow get this into my system and to take it in not a different direction, but to progress with that. And that's been really interesting. That's been really good. As I said, I'm still in touch with both of my teachers, but I've personally found that my progress was faster after I went. And then a good friend of mine, who I think we put us in touch now, Neil Bates, who I actually met Neil 20 years ago at a Chen Wang seminar in Reading in South the UK. So I didn't know him really well at that time. We just met a couple of times, and came out to Hong Kong once in my first year of Hong Kong, believe it or not, and sent me an email, and he had a couple of lessons with CS Tang.
Oh, okay.
At that time, and met him because CS he's sort of the easiest teacher to introduce people to get an introduction, and as you said, the environment and everything there, and his level of English and stuff. If you're coming over as a tourist, he's a great guy to do some coaching. I could never have taken anybody into Jingmo or introduced them to Chan Tak Chuen, put them through getting punched in the face and stuff like that.
Welcome, boof.
Want to come back and yeah, exactly. How was your holiday? Well, you can see my broken nose. Apart from that, it was good. So we'd kind of stayed in touch, and then he sought me out on social media and asked me if I would begin teaching Yi Quan. I learned some Yi Quan before.
Okay.
Different people and stuff. So it kind of started with that, and I never wanted the teaching to be a big thing.
Yeah.
Because I'm busy, like I've said, and training's first, and work and family and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then it just sort of developed into more of a group. That Neil had his group that he built up, a really nice bunch of people down there. So started to go down there for seminars and make them more open. And I have a couple of private students up here in the Northeast as well. Not too many. And that's kind of where we were. And I started last year to work on a book.
Yes.
About Yi Quan. Yeah. It was really talking about my training experience. It's not a textbook on how to do Yi Quan or anything like that, or this is Yi Quan, this is a definite. It's nothing like that.
Okay.
It's more my journey within Yi Quan, and then putting in some lessons and some bits and pieces around that, and talking about the concepts as I understand it, as I've been taught it, and that just got published last week, actually.
Yes, I saw that.
So that's and a lot of people saying, "Oh, so you wrote a book in lockdown?" I didn't write a book in lockdown. I wrote it last year, actually.
Yeah.
It was in 2019, and so my good friend Alex Cosma, I don't know if you know Alex.
Yes, he does Line of Intent, right?
He does, yeah. So he's been publishing books for many years and videos.
I have one of the books, I think.
Himself.
Yeah, I think he's got a book that I bought maybe 10 years ago called Warrior God's Mountain, or something like that. Gotta look somewhere in my cupboard here.
I've read that book. Alex he's been quite a prolific author himself, and is a high level practitioner and teacher of Xing.
Yeah.
And just promoted various different people. So I've met Alex before I went to Hong Kong. Did some Xing with him, actually.
Okay.
And we stayed in touch over the years, and it was kind of talking to him and his idea actually to do that. So I thank him for that. And found that I kind of enjoyed the experience of writing. So I've done a couple of other things as well yet to be published. So we've done a book on strength and conditioning for internal martial artists.
Okay.
So I think that's again another loaded big subject.
Yeah.
You can't do
there's
that.
no strength.
You can't do that.
There's no strength in internal martial arts. What's wrong with you? Exercise?
No.
And if you're sweating, you're not doing it. It's wrong.
Absolutely. So I've because obviously I've got the background in sports science as well, which gives me hopefully an interesting perspective around it. And I've done physical conditioning my whole life.
That sounds interesting.
And enjoy that and still do that as separate it from my training.
Yeah.
But they're complementary to each other.
Of course.
If you do it correctly, if you do it right, if you do it with thought, they should permeate into each other, but you shouldn't necessarily mix them together.
Yeah.
It's always been my perspective on having the separation side. And then the other one, which would be kind of interesting to you, Byron, is a comparison of Western boxing and Xing.
Oh, wonderful.
Particularly in the sort of that golden period that we've been talking about, sort of pre 1940s, when boxing is going through a lot of changes as well. It's a very different art to what it was back then in the original style. It was taught alongside the cudgel. It was taught with a sword.
Yeah.
And from bare knuckle boxing to Marcus of Queensberry rules coming in, and then amateur boxing becoming very popular in the 50s and changing the sport so much as well. You've got a lot of very different but parallels with Xing, how it's changed today, and then you've got a few people like yourself included that practice the original art and with that intention, and it's a small group, and then the wider kind of understanding of the art, which may not be exactly as it is. So that's more of a technical sort of book. So that's been good, and I'm still teaching. Obviously, we've been affected by this lockdown and pandemic and stuff like that. So the seminars have been on hold for the last few months, but we're just getting up and teaching this weekend actually, and going down south.
Well, hopefully that's ending soon. Hopefully there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So
yeah, we hope, because I think for a lot of martial artists and I mean, I don't earn my living from doing this, but some do. It's been really tough.
Yeah.
to continue the training. And I've done some online training as well. And again, the convenience of each one is you're not needing that much space. You can do stuff on Skype.
Yeah.
And it's really important to have the hands-on. But I think as an introduction, I would never be able to do that without in-person training as well.
Well, we do what we can, you know.
On it all, but I think you can.
You do what you can.
It makes up for stuff, doesn't it?
Well, that's the thing, and that's the other thing that Westerners don't seem to understand about the actual way we train traditional Chinese martial arts. You don't stop training because the weather is slightly different. You just make your training slightly different because of the weather, the environment, or circumstances. The key is to continue.
Absolutely.
You've just got to continue.
Consistency.
Yeah, your training has to be as resilient as the civilization has been through all its turmoil and changes. So that's exactly what it needs to do, you know. So
it is, but in Western sports science, that's also the concept of adaptation.
Yeah.
That you adapt to the environment and you do what you need to do. But you're right, you've got to be consistent because you're training a fighting art, and you know if there's a bit of drizzle outside, I don't really fancy doing that today. I mean, to question yourself, what are you training and why are you training it and what do you want to get out of it? And yeah, when people have different motivations, and there's nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah.
But it's about being in that group of not being delusional about if I train a certain way, I engage in certain practice and I do certain things. That won't necessarily lead me to develop ability in a different area. You know, if you want to learn how to use what you do and practice it, you have to train accordingly, right?
Well, that's it.
And that's specificity in terms of what you do.
Well, that's what I've loved about living in Beijing and training here is the distinct 4 seasons. It used to be a pain in the butt in the beginning, but now I like it because things change according to the season. For example, now when we just had the hottest period of summer, when it's very, very hot and humid for the last, we've already started to cool down, but up until about 2 weeks ago, for a period of about 6 to 8 weeks, it was so ridiculously hot and humid that there's absolutely no way you can do spear. There's no way. It's just not possible. So you focus on other things. And in winter, it's ridiculously cold and you're wearing piles of clothing. You also adapt and focus on different things in winter, different things in spring, and different things in autumn. And it's the beauty of these changes and the consistency throughout that over the years gives you the result, you know. So that's
I totally agree. And that's you know, that concept, when you go back to doing something that you've done before, you look at it differently with different eyes, and you're better at doing it because you've been focused on something else. And it's similar again, you know, the parallel with Western training of having sort of pre-season training and going in phases in terms of what you do and focusing on one thing for a couple of months and then another thing. You know, it's boring otherwise as well. If you're going to have the same daily practice year after year, it's going to lead to stagnation. And I think, you know, what you said there, that approach is similar to what I do for different reasons as well. But climate's one of them as well. And you know, you change what you do, but it doesn't mean you stop training. For me, there's nothing more refreshing than going out in different weather and you know, getting soaked in the rain while you're training and you know, sun on you doing different things as well. It makes you feel good. It makes you feel fresh, and it keeps you on your toes. And as I said, stagnation is something that can creep into your training.
Well, it kills your spirit faster than it kills your body. That's the other side of it. So
absolutely, and you've got to enjoy your training. It's got to be fun. That's one thing that Hui Kit Wah said to me the first thing. If you're not enjoying your training, it's not fun. You ain't going to get anything out of it because it for me and I'm sure for you and lots of, it's a huge part of our life. And geez, I don't want to be miserable. I don't train if I feel miserable doing it, if I don't enjoy doing it.
Exactly.
Like, just go to the pub and have a beer instead.
Exactly.
Do something that makes you happy.
Yeah.
So if you're frustrated in your training and it's not, you know, you need to sort of take it apart and look at what you do and do things that make you happy.
Ideally, do both. Enjoy your training, do it well, and then afterwards go to the pub. Why not?
Absolutely, but not at the same time. That doesn't work out.
No. So when are these other books looking to come out that you were mentioning?
Well, we're hoping to get the conditioning one out by the end of this year. It's all written. Just need to take the photographs on that one and move on.
Okay.
And I've currently got a good friend of mine doing the illustrations for the boxing and Shigi book, because I want that to have a bit more of a sort of old school manual look about it.
Cool.
So yeah, he's a very good artist. So he's got a boxing background. I just need to teach him how to do the postures from the Xing Yuen stuff.
Okay.
And we started that process. That's probably going to be next year, that one.
Okay.
And that's a much bigger volume. I mean, it's, the other two are not the largest books in the world. They're quite concise because of the subjects and what they are. What I didn't want to do is fill it, full of fluff and useless stuff, but try to have some kind of meaning in it. And I read a lot as well in martial arts and conditioning and lots of different stuff. And for me, the easiest way to learn is always when you see somebody given parallels of stories of experiences they've had trying to illustrate a point. It kind of sinks in more of, rather than this is how you do it,
right,
and this is what you'll get from that. But it's talking about experiences and what you've gone through and learned from being exposed to that. And read them. There's lots of books on martial arts, but I think there's few that go there's some that go that deep to give that kind of stuff across. Right?
Yeah. Well, that all sounds very exciting. I think we've gotten some very interesting stories out of you. Maybe we can do this again in an upcoming episode. Is there, I'll get your contact details that you want published.
Definitely.
I'll put them in the show notes. And then we'll also put a link to your book that's out now, and anything else for the listeners that they can find you or get in contact with you or what. But
that's very kind of you. And I must send you a copy of the book, by all.
Oh, I'd love to see it. I'd love to read it. So
post that across to you. Yeah, I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk to you. I've enjoyed the conversation.
As have I.
A lot.
As have I.
So yeah, we'll exchange details around that, and if anyone wants to, I'm always fairly approachable guy, wants to ask me any questions about stuff. I'm always open.
All right. Well, that's
chat about martial arts.
That sounds very good. Okay. Well, thank you once again, and have a good remainder of your day, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Yeah. You too. Cheers, Byron. Take care.
You too. Bye bye.